Those listeners that are listening today and know me even just a little bit, in fact, I've probably referenced it half a dozen times on the podcast here, will know that I am a lover of wine. And I'm not a wine snob. In fact, I like all colors and most variants of wine. There aren't too many that I haven't at least found one version of that I really enjoy. And so when today's guest was suggested to me by one of our clients, Renata, I was thrilled at the thought that I might actually have an in to talk to this particular lovely lady and her industry, which very clearly now obviously involves wine. Today, I am joined by the lovely Alison Mercer from Mercer Wines. Alison, thank you so much for making some time to be here to chat today.
Oh, you're welcome. It's lovely to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. And I just know it's going to be an absolute pleasure because we've just had a lovely little chat offline and I'm excited to delve in. Alison, did you grow up thinking you wanted to be a wine? Well, what do we even call you? I've read in some information earlier, they call you a vintage widow. Is that something you ever aspired to be, or is this something that you kind of fell into?
Absolutely. I didn't think this is where I would be when I was, middle-aged, being a winemaker's wife. But also I'm proud to say, like, that's not all I call myself anymore. I used to, when I was young, my Instagram tag was Vintage Widow.
Yes.
And it's because one of our close friends used to call that all the winemakers' wives become widows during vintage.
Yes.
So you don't see your husband, comes home late, leaves early. Sometimes you leave out food and it's gone when they get back. But mostly you don't see them in the Hunter Valley, it's about a month or two. Mm-hmm. And in other regions, it's longer.
Wow. That's fascinating to me. Oh my gosh, there's so much to unpack here today. Okay, so tell us about, did you grow up in the Hunter? Has this always been on your radar, the whole concept of winemaking? Because I live west of Brisbane and there are no wineries around me. Actually, there is one kind of close by, but it's not a concept here for us. We're very good at drinking wine by the river, but we're not much good at growing our own wine and making it. Did you grow up in the Hunter, and has this always been around for you?
Yeah, there's a small town called Cessnock just outside of the Hunter Valley.
Yep.
And that's where Aaron and I grew up. So Aaron was from a little town called Bellbird, which is really Cessnock, but, a little suburb in the Hunter Valley. And I'm in Cessnock, and we went to high school together.
Wow.
Made friends there and then got together after school. But the Hunter Valley has always been a big part of our lives in terms of being surrounded by wine, but also being surrounded by coal mines. So Aaron's dad was a coal miner, mm-hmm. and his mum was home with him. And my mum was a nurse, and dad was a milko and a bit of an entrepreneur and had a few different businesses. Mm-hmm. So we're not from wine families by any means. But when we finished school, both of us went into hospitality. And Aaron got a job at a lovely winery called Scarborough. Mm-hmm. And they've been a great family support ever since that day. He worked with Ian Scarborough for 10 years in the winery. Wow. And learned a lot about how to make wine and how to sell wine. And I worked in hospitality in terms of hotels and restaurants. So it was a great beginning for us to see what the Hunter Valley could offer in terms of jobs and careers. But it definitely wasn't our intent to stay in that industry. It just sort of grabbed us. And, Aaron loved it and he never left.
So what was the transition like? Because I can imagine working. Well, maybe I need to understand what Aaron was doing initially at Scarborough. What was his role there, and then how did it evolve to what you're doing now?
So he started at Cellar Door, selling wine. So he talked to people about wine, how it was made, where it came from, this soil, this grape. Scarborough made Chardonnay, so he talked a lot about different types of Chardonnay. And he has the gift of the gab. So he's also quite a strapping lad. So I think the second year he was working there, Ian Scarborough said to him, all right, you're in the winery. Yes. You're not allowed to touch anything important, but you can wash the grape bins and you can dig holes. Okay. And then the next year he graduated and he was allowed to drive the forklift or, do something a little bit more important. Mm-hmm. But he was just Ian Scarborough's second and did everything that Ian did for a long time, and that's how he learnt.
There's quite a science to it, is my understanding. Now, I'm going to be really bogan and say I know nothing about the science. It's got bubbles or it doesn't. There are different grape varieties that taste. Some I really like and some I don't. Mostly I like most of them, if I'm really, really honest. And I don't understand the science. And I think perhaps this leads on to a bit of the conversation later where we talk about how you guys do what you do. I I can imagine it must have been really complicated in the beginning to understand the science of winemaking. When I think about any cellar door experience I've had, when the lovely, gorgeous person is standing in front of me and they're explaining all the things I can taste, if they don't tell me I can taste it, I can't taste it. It's only when they tell me about the fruit or the woodiness or the often there's a taste of leather or chocolate or something, I can't taste it without their information. So there's an awful lot of science and smarts that goes behind that. And I can't imagine that would be easy to learn.
Well, that part is easy to learn because it's about memory. So when you try a wine, if you remember a part of it, then next time you taste it, your brain will remember that pathway and go, oh, I remember the rock melon I tasted last time I had this Chardonnay, or I just remember that this makes me feel good when I drink it. So I remember this Chardonnay and it's my favorite.
Yep.
I think tasting wine, especially in the Hunter Valley, has become a lot less pretentious. So it's for everybody. You can come along and not know anything, and people in cellar doors in the Hunter Valley will help guide you and teach you. And you'll remember that a little bit when you go home.
Yeah.
And initially, I think the science of winemaking comes after study. And Aaron didn't do any study. He actually was at university studying environmental science, and I was at university studying teaching. And our families were very big on education and always doing better than they did. So we both went to university. And it wasn't until Aaron did a postgraduate degree in winemaking 10 years later that he really got into the chemistry and biology of winemaking and learned how all of that worked.
Yeah.
And that's the part of winemaking that's important to make a quality wine.
Yes.
But he can't really affect the flavors of wine. That's subjective for everybody because I don't know what you taste and you don't know what I taste. I can suggest things to you which will change your memory of that wine.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just can't ever tell what you're tasting. So
that
science, I call that bit art, really. Like the art of wine tasting is creative and subjective, but the science of winemaking is the quality and what he does in the winery.
Absolutely mind-blowing to me that, and it makes complete sense, of course, because everything's subjective. However, that must be really challenging in your position as a winemaker because you think you have a cracking wine and the general public might actually not enjoy it, or the other way around. There must be times when you think, this is kind of mediocre, and it flies off the shelf because everybody loves it. Is that something that happens?
Honestly, it's really hard for me to answer without praising Aaron because, I mean, a lot of tradies' wives, I imagine, are like this, but I think he does a great job.
Absolutely.
And although I'm biased, like if I didn't believe in him, I wouldn't be in this business. So he makes a really good bottle of wine. And when I'm in cellar door talking to people, they often say, oh, I like all of your wines. And I say, yeah, I didn't expect that there'd be one stand out that's really bad because otherwise we wouldn't bottle it.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, he does a really good job. So I think his product is easy to sell and easy to drink. And that's part of his talent is creating a product that people love to drink.
Win-win. I think I married into the wrong kind of trade. Perhaps I should have married a winemaker. This sounds like it's great. And I would have had a finished house long before the one that I do. Alison, tell us a little bit about that early journey. Like clearly you guys sat together and made a decision at some point that you wanted to become winemakers. And maybe we should point out the distinction, if there is a technical way to define between the two of you. There are wine growers and wine makers. Is that the correct terminology?
I mean, some companies are both, but we are just winemakers.
Yes.
We don't own a family estate or vineyards. We're, growing our portfolio of business and real estate and a young family, but we don't have a winery or a cellar door or vineyards. So inevitably, Aaron has made, over the years of working in Europe and Canada, USA. We lived for a few years, and back in the Hunter Valley. He's made connections with growers, and now he has relationships where he'll buy grapes from them, make wine for Mercer Wines, and we have a product to sell. So it's an innovative method of creating a wine business, but it's exciting too because it's flexible.
It is flexible. And I love that your connections are all over the world. So let's touch on that before we get right into what you guys are currently doing. So you traveled with this to get presumably the experience for Aaron to do what he is now currently doing. Was that the idea behind spending your time overseas?
Yes, and my love of travel, I think. Aaron loved traveling too. He was always watching cooking shows and things when he was younger. But I just had this overwhelming urge after school to go somewhere and travel. So at university, I learned languages, and Aaron had been at Scarborough for almost 10 years. And I had to almost drag him away and say, look, I'm going overseas. I'd already done a stint, almost a year by myself as a nanny.
Oh, wow.
In France, and I just had to go again. So we took off around the world together, but it was on the condition that he would fit in some vintages.
Yes.
So one of our vintages was in France, and we did a ski season in the Alps of France, which was not wine related, but he learned to ski, so that was okay. We did some farming where I learned to speak French fluently.
Wow.
And yeah, so he worked in a vineyard, in a winery, didn't know any French, got kicked out of French school because he was too beginner. The only words he really knew were stop and go, which is lucky that he knew how to make wine. But I worked on a veggie farm with a lady who grew organic vegetables and learned all of my French.
Wow, that's incredible.
So travel is actually, that's part of our labels. Our three loves are wine, travel, and family.
Love it.
And that's just the three things that really excite us in life.
That's fantastic. So I imagine that we do things somewhat similar and then also very different depending on the country that we're in when it comes to winemaking. So his extraordinary life experience would bring about a different way to create the wines, presumably, or a different way to look. I'm speaking out of my depth here because clearly I've got no idea. I presume, and you're going to tell me if I'm wrong, that what he has learnt is the way to create different blends so that you have a unique proposition with what you create with Mercer wines. Is that in fact true, or am I talking out of my backside?
Maybe, but I think a lot of the experience you get overseas is about what not to do.
Fascinating.
Because, maybe they make wine a really traditional way where they let a lot of oxygen in, or they use an old pump that isn't really preserving the fruit. Maybe they use too much sulfur and it affects the flavor and the color of the wine. I think working in all different wineries, from a lackey to a more experienced winemaker in America, from small companies to big commercial companies. In America, Aaron made a lot of wine for different brands in Trader Joe's and for another company in Paso Robles. So that was the extreme. He's never worked in such big quantities before. But just getting experience. As an apprentice, you can't know everything. But going to different companies, different places, and working under different people, you get an insight into things that work and things that don't. And now with all that experience, starting Mercer Wines, he gets to experiment with things that will work for us and his dreams of what kind of wine he wants to make.
Because the blends of wines, is it kind of what we enjoy conditional upon the environment that we live in? Like, I enjoy a really nice red wine during winter. I don't much like it during summer. So that's where I guess my question is coming from. And there would be different blends that work, I presume, for different climates. Is that in fact another truth, or is it another furphy that I'm making up to suit myself?
Yeah, I think it's so personal.
Yeah, okay.
But the weather is definitely dependent on what people drink and what people buy. So, I mean, in Brisbane, I imagine you drink a lot more white and rosé than you would reds. Whereas in Canberra and in Victoria, they love their reds because it's colder there.
Yes.
So yeah, weather is a big dependent. And it's seasonal, as in what people buy at the bottle shop or at restaurants as well.
No.
That thing about have this wine with this meal,
Yeah.
I think that's a little bit outdated. If you love a semi-on and you're having fish, great, because they're a perfect match in the wine world.
Yep.
But if you also want a Pinot red wine with your fish, then that's okay.
Yeah.
It's whatever tastes good in your mouth, whatever you want to go with.
I do love that I guess I'd call it a snobbiness when I grew up, and clearly I'm of a vintage. Listeners, many of you have seen my face. I've got a few greys. I'm certainly of some vintage. It was really snobby, right? And so you kind of had my dad would call them the corner store reds that we all drank that were easy drinking reds, but to get into like a full body Shiraz or something that I find really consumable now, but back then it was you almost had to. It was snobby. There's no other way to say it. It was almost snobby to drink wine, and I think that's very Australian. We're so ochre about it all. I don't know whether that's because it's now more easy drinking, or it's because we've become more educated, or whether the industry as a whole has become less snobby. And so it's quite okay to drink any blend that you particularly like, depending on what tastes for you, or it's okay for you to, as you say, pair a red with your fish if that's what floats your boat. So yeah, it's certainly it appears to me to be a different industry than it was, say, I'm going to say 20 years ago, because that's a bit flattering to me.
No, I agree. And I think the media and wine writers and wine companies, marketing can really affect what people do. Like at the moment, there's a craze about no low wines. So sometimes they've got no preservatives and low alcohol or no alcohol. And that's a marketing thing. It's also a health choice.
Yeah.
And some people are going with that. But there's still wine with dinner and wine when you're out at a pub, wine when you're at a restaurant, that people still choose to drink their favourite thing. At Cellar Door, I think the best thing is you've got a captive audience because people came to visit you, for starters. They made a choice to go there. And you can let them try different things without being pretentious and saying, this goes with this. Just say, hey, I know you said you don't like Shiraz, but I think I've got one that's a bit lighter that I think you'll enjoy. Or give them something blind and say, all right, I've got two wines here. One's a Shiraz and one's a Montepulciano. Do you want to try and guess the difference? And then they go, oh, I actually like that one. I'm like, oh, well, that was the Shiraz. So,
I love that.
So you give people a bit of fun in Cellar Door and something to change up their ideas of what they should like and what they used to like. My tastes have definitely changed with age. So I think it's a personal thing, and perhaps our bodies change taste with age. I'm not sure.
Makes complete sense to me. Alison, can we talk about the business of wine? So the two of you have returned home to the Hunter Valley, and you've at some point made a decision that you want to go into business together creating wines. Tell me about how that started out for you guys and what the journey was like in the early days.
Yeah, I still can't believe that I'm here sometimes because I am a primary school teacher.
Wow.
I've only been on maternity leave with Charlie for two years. So before that, I was primary school teaching and business, like doing all the back end stuff of the business.
Yep.
Just mostly starting it up, doing the accounts, sort of tidying up things that Aaron doesn't finish. That's how I started. And then I'm quite good at that. And I like events and I like organising things. So it worked well. And then I had Charlie, and I just, I'm not going to go straight back to work after a baby. So it was flexible and I could take Charlie along to most things I was doing. So, I think about 6 months in, Aaron said to me, now you've got to decide. You've got to decide if you're all in and you're going to be in the business, or you're going back to teaching. Like, what is it? And I just couldn't, I didn't want to leave Charlie so young. So I said, all right, I'm in. And I still sometimes think, like, why am I in? Someone else can do this. Someone else can do it. And then I go, oh no one else can do what I do. So so I'm in the business, but I still don't know what I'm doing. That's how I feel.
That's a very familiar tale. I think the same thing can be said by just about every tradie wife I've ever spoken to. So how long have you guys been in business? How long has Mercer Wines been in existence? And how has it grown over that time, Alison?
So I think this is our fourth vintage.
Mhm.
The first vintage, I wasn't really involved, but yeah, three vintages. Aaron's gone around vineyards and sourced grapes, and we have our own label. So during that time, we've kind of underpinned the business with contract services. So Aaron's also a contract winemaker, and making wine for bigger companies or even smaller companies who don't have their own winemaker. So
Mhm.
he's just renting himself out and his services,
Mhm.
until we grow enough in our brand to be just Mercer Wines. So I forget the question.
Maybe about the growth, Alison. So, this is your fourth vintage now. Clearly, there's been a lot of growth. I imagine as a business, it could be quite challenging to get your product out into the marketplace as well. So maybe you could share a little bit about what that's looked like.
Yeah, I think early on we hooked up with a great distributor in Sydney, which is our closest market. So AJWM, Andrew Jamison Wine Merchants,
Mhm.
they sell our wine in Sydney, and we're in a lot of cool venues and bottle shops that really help get our name out there.
Love
And
it.
when people say, where can I see your wine? We say, okay, you can go to Icebergs in Bondi, you'll find our Rosado or something
Oh,
like that.
nice. Well done.
Or Nomads, our Pinot Grigios on the list at Nomad, and
Wow.
it's impressive to be with a distributor who knows a lot of cool places in Sydney.
Yeah.
And we're not really in the midst of like hip and cool winemakers because we're middle aged and or, on the younger side of middle aged, but
Yes, nicely put.
making great quality wine,
Mhm.
um, winning awards left, right, and centre,
Hmm.
and I think our growth is a bit at the moment. It's on the rise,
Mhm.
and we're just so in growth mode because so many things are happening. So
Mm.
it's a bit about networking. It's a bit about giving back to the industry of winemaking and Wine New South Wales. It's a bit about entering wine shows. But we've grown in staff. Like we have someone in the winery with Aaron now. We have Kiri who makes wine with him. We have a pop-up cellar door, and we've got cellar door staff, and we have someone to do accounts. We have a really great small team, which has really enhanced our growth
Mm.
and made us freer to do different parts of the business.
That's fantastic. You're speaking my language there. Alison, is it um, again, I've made some assumptions, so I'll ask the question first. When you do your vintage and you've created your wine for the period, does it get to the point where it runs out, or do you have a consistent supply through to next year?
Well, that's a good question because it's unpredictable. We
Uh-huh.
don't really know how much wine we're going to need. I mean, we forecast, we
Mhm.
guess, but sometimes we're wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's like Aaron does most of that,
Yep.
because he buys the grapes. But that decision is made a long time before we bottle wine. Um, so it's like how much grapes we're going to buy this year of this variety.
Mm.
And then, if Chardonnay suddenly becomes unpopular, but we've got 20,000 tons of Chardonnay, what are we going to do with it? Like, we
Absolutely.
have to split, we have to run it through cellar door and talk people into it.
Yep.
Find a restaurant that wants to serve it by the glass, or that there are other ways to sell wine. Like occasionally we put some wine into wine selectors club packs. So
Oh, clever.
um, our wine will be distributed to a wide amount of people.
Mhm.
And if they see our wine and love it, then they might come to us direct
Mm.
next time. So you have to get creative with the selling process.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I think that's the best way to explain it. There are lots of different ways to sell wine.
Mm. I can imagine it could be really challenging from a marketing perspective because you don't know when you're making those decisions about what sort of quantity of grapes to buy, what's going to happen in the next period of time. I don't know how long that period is, but you don't, like you say, it might go out of flavor. It might sell out really, really quickly. And then how do you keep the brand in top of mind if we don't have a product to sell in between now and when the next vintage is ready? Like that would be really quite complicated and I think very unique to your industry. Is that stuff like, so you guys are doing the majority of this yourselves still? Is it all self-taught or have you been able to again, gain some of that knowledge from some of the people that you and Aaron have both worked with through the time?
Yeah, we definitely get some help from people who have been in the Hunter Valley a long time. The Hunter Valley's been a really great community that, if you've got a question, you can go and ask someone, no strings attached. They just tell you what they're doing or what works for them, which is really good. I've also done a few short courses while I've been off, but particularly in social media and PR, that type of thing. I think when you're marketing yourself, most of it's self-taught.
Yes.
We've done a lot of Googling and YouTubing and trying to learn things by ourselves before, and we're still working it out. So that's the exciting part of owning your own business, is just trying to figure out the next step.
Absolutely. And it can be the most terrifying bit because there's nobody else to rely on or blame if it all goes wrong. And that can be very handy, that's for sure. So guys, you don't have a family-owned vineyard, which I can imagine could create some complexities. What next for you guys? Is that on the cards? Is that something that you'd like to work towards? Or do you have very different plans for your company? Because I imagine the way that you're currently doing it, it's quite a sustainable way for you to be purchasing and then bottling and creating these beautiful wines. I'm really interested to understand where you would like to take this. Have you had some thoughts about your 5-10 year goals?
Yeah, we have. And honestly, it's still up in the air. Because we don't own real estate, and we're sharing, all of our spaces are shared or leased. I think we'd really like to sink our teeth into somewhere that's a real home that we could invest in and build on, and people can come to us. Like, we have members now, and we want somewhere to show them around our winery and show them our cellar door, and have them say, oh, I visited the Mercer's property last week. And eventually we'd love to do that. And I think that's something in the future, but really we don't know if it's going to happen. We've got so much more to do until we get there, and we're just trying to get people to see our wine and taste our wine first and keep growing.
This has been really fascinating for me. I feel like you've educated me. I'm very thirsty now. I feel like I really need to go and find a wine, and I could sit and talk to you for hours, as a matter of fact. I'd love to have a chat with Aaron at some point. I find it really interesting to see a unique way that you guys are putting business together. This is a proposition that, again, I'm assuming probably is on the rarer side within the industry. I think there's a lot of family history that goes with the vineyards. I don't think buying in grapes and putting wines together would be unique. I've heard those stories before. Doing it the way you're doing it seems to be very unique. And I find it fascinating to think that you guys are able to, with your passion, and that's very much what I hear when you're talking about what you're doing and what Aaron's doing, have created a fantastic product that motivated one of our clients to insist that I must talk to you. And she was absolutely right. So, Alison, thank you so much for joining me today. It's really been a fascinating chat. I look forward to enjoying many of your Mercer wines. Alison, you had something very sneaky. Listeners, please listen up. There is something very exciting coming. Alison's going to do a great big solid here. So actually, she's probably doing me the great big solid. Look out for my order when we get offline today.
I just saw this opportunity just to let all of your listeners know that we would love them to try Mercer wines as well. And I haven't set this up yet, but I'll do it as soon as the podcast is over. Let's do a promo code that is Tradies Wives, VES at the end. And I'll put it in the notes as well. But let's do a promo code so that you can taste Mercer wines. We're a sustainable New South Wales wine company, and we'd love to come to Queensland and have a look around too and do some wine dinners. But I'd also want to give a quick shout out to all the other winemakers' wives, because often we're a bit ignored and the winemaker is the rock star. So I have a lot of knowledge that other winemakers' wives do too, and I'm really proud to say that I'm a really big part of the business. Absolutely. As well as the winemaker.
Yeah, we are we call us in the tradie world, we call us the real boss, Alison. I think you've displayed that very well today. That would be your role as well. Now, if our listeners want to find you and Mercer Wines, Alison, how do they find you? And I'll make sure all of this is linked in the show notes as well.
Yeah, mercerwines.com.au is the best place to have a look around. But you can find us right in the middle of the Hunter Valley in New South Wales. And on Instagram, you'll see my work. So go have a look.
Time for a holiday. I need to come down from Queensland. Or maybe I need to get you up here. Maybe that's the smarter idea for all of us. So I can have you infiltrate my local area. It's a bit hot. You might want to wait until a bit later in the year or next year. But Alison, it's been a dream. Thank you so much for joining me today. I've thoroughly enjoyed talking about wines in the middle of a random Wednesday. This is brilliant.
Have a glass.
Yes, it's time. Thank you, Alison.